He crushed his beer can and tossed it on my army portrait. "Place'll clean up fine," he said, like my whole life was just spilled pizza. Outside, my brother's truck sat crooked, spray-painted "Loser" in screaming orange, mirrors ripped off, tires slashed. The only thing Kyle hadn't stolen yet was my name. And when I checked the cameras, it wasn't Kyle holding the spray can. It was his teenage son, wearing my old varsity jacket. Kyle didn't just wreck my house. He handed my legacy to his kid like a joke. But he didn't know one thing. I had a forgotten shed cam and friends in law enforcement. And by the time I was done, that "loser" tag would become a trophy. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. My name is Jacob Merritt, and I'm 37 years old. After 12 years fixing Humvees and tanks in the Army, I came home to run my auto repair shop in rural Arkansas. The old barn-turned-garage had been my sanctuary, its oil-stained floorboards and rusted tools telling stories of 1,000 fixes. Kyle Brewster, my childhood friend who helped manage things during deployments, always wore this smile that never quite reached his eyes. Something about him had started to feel off before my last tour, like a timing belt about to snap. I'd learned in the Army to trust those instincts, but loyalty made me doubt myself. What Kyle didn't know was the security camera I'd installed in the back shed years ago, forgotten but still recording. Some men watch your back and others wait for it to turn. But let me start from the beginning. The late August heat hit me like a furnace when I stepped off the Greyhound. 12 hours from Fort Campbell to Little Rock, then another 2 by local bus to get home. My duffel bag strap dug into my shoulder as I walked the familiar quarter-mile of gravel road leading to my place. The cicadas were singing their evening chorus, same as always. But something felt wrong. You know that feeling when the air gets heavy before a storm? It was like that, but worse. First thing I noticed was the grass, waist-high and wild where it should have been neat. Kyle had promised to keep the place up while I was gone. Hell, I'd even left him a riding mower in perfect condition. The old oak trees cast long shadows across my path, and with each step, my combat boots crunched louder on the gravel, like they were trying to warn me. Remember those moments when your gut knows something's wrong before your eyes catch up? That's what hit me as I rounded the bend and saw my house. The white paint I'd touched up before deployment was peeling worse than ever. The porch boards, the ones my brother Tommy and I had replaced just months before his accident, were warped and rotting. "What the hell?" I muttered, dropping my bag. But that wasn't what stopped my heart. There, parked crooked in the driveway, was Tommy's truck, our truck. The '98 Ford F-250 we'd rebuilt together during his last summer. Every bolt, every panel, every decision had been a conversation between brothers. After the crash, finishing that truck became my way of keeping him alive. Now someone had tagged "Loser" across both doors in screaming orange paint. My hands started shaking, not from fear, but from something deeper and darker. The mirrors were gone, probably sold for quick cash. All 4 tires were slashed, the rubber sagging like defeated soldiers. I ran my fingers along the paint job we'd spent weeks perfecting. The orange paint was still tacky. Recent. You ever have a moment when the world goes silent? When even the cicadas shut up and all you can hear is your own blood rushing in your ears? That's where I was standing, trying to make sense of this nightmare. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air reeked of stale beer and moldy pizza. Empty cans littered every surface. Pizza boxes curled at the corners like dead leaves. My boots crunched on broken glass. And when I looked down, I saw my Army portrait, the one Mom had insisted on framing, shattered on the hardwood floor. The sight of my uniform under broken glass felt like a punch to the gut. I'd trusted Kyle with everything. My home, my business, my brother's memory in that truck. We'd grown up together, shared secrets, covered for each other through high school. He'd been the one person I thought I could count on. Now, standing in what felt like a war zone of betrayal, I couldn't breathe right. Then I heard it, the soft hiss of a beer can opening. Kyle stepped out of the hallway like he owned the place, Corona in hand, wearing the same smug smile I'd seen 1,000 times before. But now I finally understood what that smile meant. "Welcome home, soldier," he said, taking a long pull from his beer. His eyes had this glazed look like he'd been drinking since breakfast. Guess you saw the new yard art out front? I stood there, fists clenched so tight my knuckles went white. 12 years in the Army had taught me discipline, taught me to channel rage into strategy. But standing there, seeing him treat my home, my life, like his personal trash heap, something inside me started to crack. The setting sun streamed through the windows, catching the beer can in his hand. It glinted like a signal flare, marking the exact moment my old life ended and something else began. The Corona dangled loose in Kyle's grip as he gestured vaguely at the wreckage of my living room. Look, man, things got a little out of hand a few times. You know how it goes. Had some buddies over, threw a few parties. He took another swig, not meeting my eyes. Place'll clean up fine. My jaw clenched so tight I could hear my teeth grinding. And the truck? That just got out of hand, too? Ah, hell, that was probably those Wilson kids from down the road. Kyle's voice had that fake concern I'd heard him use on customers when explaining inflated repair bills. They've been nothing but trouble lately. Caught 'em throwing rocks at old man Peterson's windows last month. The lie hung between us like smoke. I'd known the Wilson boys since they were in diapers. Good kids who'd rather fix engines than break them. But I kept my voice steady, remembering the security system I'd installed before deployment. The cameras should have caught whoever did it. Kyle's shoulders twitched in a dismissive shrug. Yeah, about that. System kept glitching out. Red lights would be on, but nothing recording. I meant to call the company, but... He waved his beer again, like that explained everything. You meant to call. The words came out flat. Every excuse, every casual wave-off of destruction was stoking something dangerous in my chest. That what you meant to do about the grass, too? The porch? My brother's truck? Come on, Jake. His smile turned patronizing. You've been gone a long time. Things happen. Life gets busy. He crushed his empty can and tossed it onto my coffee table. Tell you what, I'll help you clean up tomorrow. Right now I should probably head home. Lisa's making dinner. I watched him swagger out, noticed how he carefully avoided looking at the truck. The screen door slammed behind him and I was alone with the wreckage of my life. You know what 12 years in the Army teaches you? Patience, strategy, and never to ignore your gut when it's screaming at you. I waited until the sound of Kyle's pickup faded before heading to my office. The security system's main unit was hidden behind a false panel, something else I'd never mentioned to Kyle. My hands were steady as I pulled up the footage archives. Just like he'd said, most of the feeds were dead or corrupted. Convenient. But there was one camera Kyle didn't know about. The old shed cam I'd installed after some tools went missing years back. It ran on its own circuit, backing up to a separate drive. The footage was grainy, timestamp showing 3 days ago. At first, all I saw was the usual view of the driveway, Tommy's truck gleaming under the security light. Then a figure appeared, moving with the cocky stride of youth. He was wearing a leather jacket I recognized, my old varsity jacket, the one that had disappeared from the hall closet. My stomach knotted as the kid approached the truck, shaking something in his hand. Orange paint sprayed across the doors, forming letters. LOSER. Each stroke was deliberate, meant to hurt. The vandal stepped back to admire his work. And that's when he turned. The security light caught his face clear as day. Tyler Brewster, Kyle's 16-year-old son. The rage I'd been holding back hit me like a physical wave. Not just at Tyler. Kids do stupid things. No, this was about Kyle. About a man I'd trusted with everything, who'd given his own son the keys to my house, my jacket, and permission to destroy what was mine. I rewound the footage, watching it again. Tyler's face showed no hesitation, no guilt. Just the same smug satisfaction I'd seen on his father's face an hour ago. Remember what I said about that shed camera being the key to everything? Watching Kyle's boy desecrate my brother's memory, I knew I'd found the first piece of truth. But something told me there was more, much more, hidden in those grainy images. I just had to keep watching. I settled in for a long night, cursor hovering over the playback button. The cicadas had started up again outside, their song now feeling less like home and more like a warning. The next morning I didn't confront Kyle. 12 years of military service teaches you when to strike and when to gather intel. Instead, I drove into town, letting muscle memory guide my truck down familiar streets while my mind churned through possibilities. First stop, Marshall's Hardware, where I'd bought supplies for years. The bell chimed as I pushed through the door, and the smell of sawdust and metal hit me like an old friend. Behind the counter, Pete Marshall's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. "Jake Merritt, heard you were back." He reached across to shake my hand. "How long you been home?" "Just got in yesterday." I kept my tone casual, leaning against the counter like I was just catching up. "Place needs some work. Thinking about restocking the garage, too." Pete's smile flickered. "Yeah? Thought business was good these days." Kyle's been in here bragging about how he can barely keep up with demand. My chest tightened, but I forced a chuckle. "That right?" "Oh yeah. Says he's got customers coming from 3 counties over now." Pete scratched his chin. "Funny thing is, his prices are way under market. Don't know how he manages it, but..." He stopped, something clicking behind his eyes. "Wait, wasn't that your..." "Thanks, Pete." I cut him off, not ready to hear it spoken aloud. "Good seeing you." The diner was next. Lucy's had been serving the same greasy breakfast special since I was a kid, and the vinyl booth still squeaked the same way. I slid into one, ordering coffee I didn't want just to listen. 2 booths over, Mary Chen, my old high school chemistry teacher, was talking to someone I didn't recognize. "Such a shame about Jake Merritt. Kyle says the war really did a number on him. Started forgetting things, getting paranoid." The stranger clucked sympathetically. "PTSD? Must be. Kyle tried to help, but Jake just got worse. Even accused Kyle of stealing from him before he left. Can you imagine?" The coffee turned to acid in my stomach. I'd never accused Kyle of anything, but he'd planned for that possibility, hadn't he? Planted seeds of doubt about my mental state, so anything I might say would sound like paranoid delusions. You ever notice how betrayal has a physical weight? It sits in your gut like cold lead, making every breath harder than the last. I paid without touching my coffee and drove home. The garage door groaned as I pulled it up, and the emptiness hit me like a punch. Where rows of specialty tools should have been, I found dust outlines. The shelves of spare parts, everything from vintage carburetors to custom chrome work, were bare. Even the mini fridge was gone. My hands were shaking as I yanked open the workbench drawers. Most were empty, but the bottom one stuck. I'd installed that drawer myself, added a false bottom that even Kyle didn't know about. It was where I kept the garage's real ledger. The notebook was still there, its pages crisp with fresh entries in Kyle's hasty scrawl. Each line told another piece of the story. Dates, buyers' names, descriptions of parts. My parts. Some entries went back months before my deployment. 67 Mustang carburetor, $800. I remembered rebuilding that one myself, spending weeks getting it perfect. Kyle had sold it for a quarter of its value. Custom chrome package, complete, $200. That was from Tommy's old Harley project. I'd promised those parts to his kid when he was old enough to ride. Page after page of my life, cataloged and sold off piece by piece. The dates matched the security footage timestamps. Every time Tyler had vandalized my property, Kyle had been inside, stealing what he could carry. I closed the ledger, feeling that cold lead in my stomach start to heat up into something dangerous. Kyle hadn't just betrayed me. He'd tried to erase me, my reputation, my business, even my brother's memory. He'd turned his own son into a weapon against me, spread lies about my sanity, and sold off pieces of my life while I was serving my country. The cicadas started up their evening chorus as I sat there, holding the evidence of Kyle's betrayal. Through the garage window, I could see my brother's defaced truck, the orange letters still screaming "loser" in the fading light. But now I knew the truth. I had proof, and I had a decision to make. I sat in the barn until midnight, staring at that ledger like it might suddenly reveal some other truth. The bare shelves threw shadows in the dim light, making the place feel hollow as my chest. Every now and then, a car would pass on the main road, headlights sweeping across the walls, and I'd tense up thinking it might be Kyle coming back to take whatever scraps he'd missed. You know, that bone-deep tiredness that comes after a sucker punch? The kind that makes you wonder if getting back up is even worth it? That's where I was, My whole body felt heavy, like I was still wearing full combat gear in 100-degree heat. The smell of motor oil and rust hung thick in the air, familiar as my own skin. Used to be comforting, that smell. Reminded me of Sunday afternoons with my brother, both of us covered in grease, arguing over the right way to rebuild a transmission. Now it just reminded me of everything Kyle had stolen. I pulled myself up, joints creaking, and grabbed a piece of cardboard from behind the workbench. The marker was dried out, but I found another in the truck's glove box. My hand shook as I wrote the words, "For sale." "Sorry, Tommy," I whispered, touching the truck's hood. The orange spray paint seemed to glow in the darkness, mocking me. Maybe it was time to admit defeat, move somewhere fresh, start over where nobody knew my name or Kyle's lies about me. The cicadas had gone quiet, like they were holding their breath. I stood there with that sign, remembering how Tommy and I had pieced this truck together over 2 summers. He'd insisted on the custom metallic paint job, even though it cost 3 months' worth of weekend work. "Gotta make her shine, little brother," he'd said, grinning that crooked grin of his. My phone buzzed, startling me so bad I dropped the sign. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized it instantly. "Merritt," a gravelly voice said before I could speak. "You still up? Sergeant Doyle?" My voice cracked a little. I hadn't heard from him since my discharge ceremony. "Been thinking about you, son. Something told me you might be burning midnight oil." I leaned against the truck's fender, suddenly grateful for the solid metal against my back. "How'd you know?" "Same way I knew you were about to do something stupid in Kandahar that night. Call it sergeant's intuition." He paused, and I could almost see him rubbing his bald head like he always did when choosing his words carefully. "Heard some rumors about trouble back home." "Sir, Don't sir me, Jake, I'm not your CO anymore." Another pause. "Tell me straight. How bad?" The whole story spilled out of me then. Kyle's betrayal, the vandalism, the stolen parts, the ruined reputation. Doyle listened without interrupting, just like he used to during mission debriefs. When I finished, the silence stretched long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "So," he finally said, voice hard as granite, "you gonna fix this or fold?" The question hit me like a splash of cold water. I straightened up, muscle memory from 1,000 formations taking over. "Because the Jake Merritt I know," Doyle continued, "the one who kept our whole damn motor pool running with duct tape and determination, that man doesn't quit when things get ugly. That man finds a way through." My free hand had curled into a fist without me realizing it. I looked at the "for sale" sign lying in the dirt, then at Tommy's truck. The orange paint seemed less bright somehow, less permanent. "Remember what I taught you about battlefield assessment?" Doyle asked. "Yes, yeah. Analyze the situation, identify resources, form a strategy, and execute with precision." The words came automatically, but they sparked something in my chest, something that felt an awful lot like purpose. "That's right." I could hear the smile in his voice now. "You've got evidence, skills, and that brain that could troubleshoot a Humvee in the middle of a sandstorm. Use them." I picked up the cardboard sign and tore it in half, then quarters. The sound was sharp and satisfying in the quiet barn. "There's my soldier," Doyle said softly. "Now you want some tactical advice?" Morning hit different after that call with Doyle. I watched the sun climb over my property with new eyes, sizing up the battlefield like he taught me. The mess Kyle left behind wasn't just damage anymore, it was evidence. You ever notice how a plan feels different when you're not alone with it? When someone else sees the same path you do? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old contacts until I found the one I needed. Mateo Hernandez. We'd served together before he traded his MP badge for a deputy's star back home. Last I heard, he'd made part-time investigator with the sheriff's department. The phone rang 3 times before his familiar drawl came through. "Hernandez." "Mateo, it's Jake Merritt." A pause, then a low chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned. Heard you were back stateside. Also heard you'd gone crazy and started giving away auto parts." "Yeah, about that." I filled him in on Kyle's operation, the security footage, everything. Mateo didn't interrupt, just made the occasional grunt of acknowledgement. I could hear him chewing on one of those toothpicks he always carried. "Send me the video," he said when I finished. "I'll run it up the chain, but quietly. Meanwhile, I might have an idea. 2 hours later, I was sitting in his office watching him tap away at his computer. The room smelled like coffee and gun oil. Some things never change, military or civilian. "Your boy's been busy," Mateo said, spinning his monitor toward me. "Check out these listings." The screen showed various marketplace posts: vintage Ford parts, suspension components, transmission pieces, all matching what had disappeared from my garage. My jaw clenched. "Here's what we do," Mateo said, pulling that toothpick from one corner of his mouth to the other. "You create a fresh account, reach out about parts. I'll wire you up, record everything. One wrong word from him about stolen goods." He snapped the toothpick for emphasis. I nodded slowly. "He won't suspect me? My name won't be anywhere near it. We'll use my cousin's details. He's away on rotation anyway." Mateo's eyes had that sharp focus I remembered from our MP days. "Kyle's gotten sloppy, Jake, confident. That's when guys like him make mistakes." The next hour was spent crafting the perfect message. Nothing too eager, nothing too specific. Just another gearhead looking for classic Ford parts. I remembered how Kyle talked about his inventory at the house, all proud swagger and hints about special deals. "Sent," I said, hitting enter. "Now we wait?" Mateo grinned. "Not for long. Guys like Kyle can't resist a fresh mark." Sure enough, barely 20 minutes passed before my phone buzzed. Kyle's response was exactly what we'd hoped for. Chatty, boastful, with a not-so-subtle hint about having other items not listed publicly. "Perfect," Mateo muttered, reading over my shoulder. "Now let's set the meet. Suggest the old Phillips station out on County Road 8. Plenty of coverage for our people, only one way in or out." I typed carefully, suggesting the location like it was my own idea. Mentioned being willing to pay cash for the right parts. Kyle's reply came even faster this time. "Got a nice selection of F-Series parts," he wrote. "Some real cherry pieces. Better than that junk at the salvage yard." My hands shook slightly as I read his words. Those were my parts he was talking about. Parts I'd carefully preserved, cataloged, stored away for proper restoration projects. Now he was treating them like common scrap. "Easy," Mateo said, noticing my tension. "We got him. Meeting set for tomorrow afternoon. I'll have plainclothes units in position, dash cams rolling. You just need to get him talking about where these parts came from." I looked at the wire setup on Mateo's desk. Small, professional-grade equipment that would catch every word. "He trusts his own voice too much to keep quiet," I said. "Always has. That's what we're counting on." Mateo leaned back, a predatory smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Sometimes the best trap is just giving a man enough rope to hang himself." Looking at those marketplace listings again, at Kyle's smug responses promising premium merchandise, I felt a calm settle over me. The kind of calm that comes with having a solid plan, reliable backup, and the absolute certainty of justice ahead. You know that moment in the garage when all the parts line up just right? When you can see exactly how everything's going to fit together? That's what this felt like. Kyle thought he was just making another sale. He had no idea he was walking into a precision-engineered takedown. The next afternoon found me leaning against my truck at the Phillips station, watching dust devils dance across the empty lot. The place had been closed for years, just a shabby concrete island with rusty pumps and faded signs. Perfect spot for what we had planned. You ever notice how time moves different when you're waiting? Those 15 minutes before Kyle showed felt longer than my last deployment. I kept checking the wire under my shirt, though Mateo had assured me it was invisible. A familiar rumble broke the silence, Kyle's F-150 pulling in, suspension creaking under what looked like a full load. My stomach tightened. Those had to be my parts in the back wrapped in old moving blankets. "Hey there," Kyle called out, killing the engine. He hopped down wearing that same damn smile I'd known since high school. "You must be Miguel's cousin." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. We'd agreed I'd use my middle name, Robert, to avoid any slip-ups. "That's right, thanks for meeting way out here." "No problem, man. Privacy's better for business anyway." He dropped his tailgate with a clang. "Got some sweet pieces you're gonna love." The next 20 minutes were pure torture. Kyle pulled out part after part, my parts, handling them like cheap swap meat finds. Each one had a story he'd invented, complete with made-up previous owners and imaginary restoration projects. "Now this," he said, holding up a pristine carburetor I'd rebuilt myself. "This beauty came from a collector up in Memphis. Guy was particular about his stuff." I managed an interested grunt. "Looks well maintained." "Oh yeah, better than that garbage my buddy used to stock." Kyle's eyes lit up, warming to his favorite subject, himself. "Speaking of which, you wouldn't believe the luck I had. This guy, real piece of work, ships off overseas, leaves me watching his place." My fingers twitched. Mateo's voice crackled in my concealed earpiece. "Stay cool, let him talk." "Whole garage full of parts just sitting there," Kyle continued, getting animated now. "I mean, he ain't coming back anytime soon, right? Heard he lost it over there, if you know what I mean." He tapped his temple with a greasy finger. "That's so." I kept my voice level, though my chest felt like it might explode. "Oh yeah, shame really. But hey, his loss is our gain." Kyle pulled out another piece, the custom intake manifold I'd spent 3 weekends perfecting. "Like this beauty, part number HP547X. Got the whole set, actually. Original owner had quite the collection." In my ear, Mateo whispered, "That's it. Part number matches your inventory list." But Kyle wasn't done. He was on a roll now, listing off more part numbers, dates of acquisition, even prices he'd gotten for pieces he'd already sold. Each detail was another nail in his coffin, and he was swinging the hammer himself. "Matter of fact," he said, leaning in conspiratorially, "I got access to that whole garage still. Anything specific you're looking for, I can probably find it." Place was like a gold mine just falling in my lap. "That's all we need." Mateo's voice came through clear. "Give the signal." I stretched, casual as could be, and scratched the back of my neck, our agreed-upon sign. Kyle never even noticed. He was too busy pulling out his phone, scrolling through pictures of more parts he'd stolen from me. "Here's something special," he started to say, but movement caught his eye. Mateo's unmarked car rolled up, lights suddenly flashing. Kyle's face went from confused to scared to angry in about 2 seconds flat. "What the hell is this?" I stepped back, letting Mateo take over. But even as the deputy began reading Kyle his rights, my mind was already on the next phase. In my pocket, my phone held the video file of Kyle's son vandalizing my truck. The school board meeting was coming up next week, the same board where Kyle had just been nominated for a parent advisory position. Sometimes karma needs a little help with its timing. The next morning, I walked into Riverside High's main office carrying a plain manila envelope. My boots echoed off the polished floors. Same ones I'd walked decades ago, back when Kyle and I were still real friends. The secretary, Mrs. Patterson, hadn't changed a bit. Still had that knowing look that made you feel like she could see right through you. "Jake Merritt?" Her eyebrows shot up. "Haven't seen you since graduation, honey. What brings you by?" "Need to submit something to the board." I kept my voice steady. "It's about the student conduct review." She nodded, typing something into her ancient desktop. "They're meeting in 10 minutes. Perfect timing. The boardroom looked exactly like I remembered. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired, and those uncomfortable plastic chairs that squeaked if you shifted wrong. 5 board members sat at their long table, shuffling papers and checking phones. Principal Rogers, new since my time, gestured for me to take a seat. "Mr. Merritt?" He consulted his notes. "You have evidence regarding recent property damage?" I handed over the envelope. "Yes, sir. Security footage from my property." The tech guy hooked up the laptop and suddenly there it was, crystal clear on the projection screen. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. A figure in my old Letterman jacket, moving with that cocky teenage swagger I recognized from 1,000 football games. The spray paint glinted in the shed light as he worked, taking his time with each letter of loser across my brother's truck. Then came the moment. That perfect turn toward the camera, face clear as day. Tommy Brewster, Kyle's boy, wearing his father's satisfied smirk. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. "The footage includes metadata verification," I explained, voice professional. And the security camera's location is documented in my home insurance records. Principal Rogers cleared his throat. Tommy Brewster is up for the Anderson Athletic Scholarship next month. I'm aware. I met his eyes. I'm also aware his father, Kyle Brewster, is nominated for the Parent Advisory Board. The whispers started immediately. One board member, looked like old Mrs. Henderson, actually clutched her pearls. I almost smiled, remembering how she used to do that when we got too rowdy in study hall. This is concerning, Rogers said carefully. Very concerning. We'll need to review this thoroughly. I stood up, straightening my jacket. Take all the time you need, I've got copies. Walking out, I heard the murmurs start. By lunch, the whole town would know. That's how it worked here, always had. Remember that time Bobby Wilson got caught stealing from the collection plate? News hit the diner before the sermon ended. Sure enough, my phone started buzzing around dinner time. First came the text from old classmates. Did you hear? Then calls from neighbors. Is it true about Tommy? The story grew legs and ran, picking up details with every retelling. I was cleaning spark plugs in the garage when Kyle's truck screamed into my driveway. He burst out like a bull, face red enough to stop traffic. You son of a bitch. He stormed toward me, fists clenched. You trying to ruin my boy's life? I set down my tools, real careful like. Evening, Kyle. Don't you evening me. That scholarship was his ticket out and the board position. I worked for that. Funny thing about tickets, I said, staying calm. They usually come with a price. He got right up in my face, close enough I could smell the whiskey on his breath. You think you're so damn smart? This ain't over. Actually, Kyle, it is. I didn't back up an inch. Your boy made his choices, just like you made yours. What's that supposed to mean? Means the sheriff has some interesting security footage, too, from that night at the gas station. I watched the color drain from his face. Turns out stealing and fencing parts across state lines is federal territory. Who knew? Kyle's shoulders sagged just a fraction, but I saw it. For the first time since I'd known him, that smug smile was nowhere in sight. Get off my property, I said quietly. And Kyle, next time you want to wreck someone's life, make sure they don't have cameras. A week crawled by like molasses in January. I kept to myself, working on small engine repairs in the garage while the town buzzed with gossip. Every morning I'd wake up, make my coffee, and watch the news trickle in through texts and calls I never answered. You ever notice how karma moves? Not like lightning, more like rust. Slow at first, then all at once. Tuesday morning, Deputy Hernandez's cruiser rolled up my driveway. He stepped out looking official, but I caught that tiny smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Morning, Jake. He adjusted his belt. Thought you'd want to know. We picked up Kyle about an hour ago. Found quite the collection in his storage unit. Serial numbers match your inventory list. I nodded, something tight unwinding in my chest. Appreciate the heads up. Interstate commerce makes it federal. He scratched his chin. FBI's involved now. Kyle's looking at serious time. The memory of motor oil on my hands from rebuilding those engines, hours of work Kyle had sold off like yard sale junk, made my jaw clench. But I kept my voice steady. He made his choices. By Thursday, the school board's decision hit the streets. Tommy Brewster, expelled, effective immediately. The Anderson Scholarship Committee withdrew their offer within hours. I heard it from Mrs. Chen at the grocery store, her voice low like she was sharing state secrets between the produce and dairy aisles. Such a shame, she whispered, bagging my apples. That boy had potential. I thought about Tommy in my old jacket, spraying paint on my brother's truck. Potential's worthless without character, Mrs. Chen. The weekend brought the finale. I was changing oil in old Mr. Peterson's Buick when Sarah pulled up in her Mercedes. Kyle's wife, always dressed like she was heading to church even on Saturday mornings. She marched straight to my workbench, her heels clicking against concrete. Jacob. She stood ramrod straight, hands clasped. I wanted you to hear it from me. I'm leaving Kyle. The oil filter in my hand suddenly felt heavy. Sarah and I had gone to high school together, back when she was Sarah Mitchell, homecoming queen with dreams bigger than our town. Kyle had been her anchor, or maybe her anchor chain. I'm sorry. I said, meaning it. Don't be. Her voice cracked, just barely. I've spent 15 years watching him cut corners, tell lies, teach our son that rules don't matter if you're clever enough. She took a deep breath. I'm done. I set down my tools, wiped my hands on a shop rag. Where will you go? My sister's in Memphis. Tommy and I leave tonight. She turned to go, then stopped. You know what the worst part is? Kyle still thinks he's the victim here. That was Kyle all over. Never met a mirror he couldn't fog up with excuses. After Sarah left, I walked out to where my brother's truck sat, that spray-painted loser still screaming across the doors. The paint had started to run from the last rain, making the letters bleed like open wounds. I ran my fingers over the metal, remembering how proud my brother had been of this old Ford. How many weekends we'd spent rebuilding her, arguing over parts and laughing about his terrible taste in country music. The whole mess felt heavy now. Kyle in cuffs, Tommy expelled, Sarah gone. Not satisfaction exactly. More like watching storm clouds break after too long holding their rain. Sometimes justice isn't about winning. It's about letting truth have its say. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Hey, Martinez Body Shop? Yeah, it's Jake Merritt. Remember that paint job we talked about? I'm ready to bring her in. Standing there in my garage, surrounded by tools that had built and rebuilt so many things, I felt the weight of the past few months settle. Kyle had tried to break me, tear down everything I'd built. But he'd forgotten something important. I'd spent my whole life fixing what others broke, and I wasn't done yet. I stood in my garage that Monday morning, staring at my brother's truck like it was both friend and stranger. The loser tag screamed across its flanks, but something had shifted in how I saw those orange letters. They weren't just vandalism anymore. They were battle scars, proof of survival. You ever notice how some wounds need to be visible? How hiding them sometimes feels like letting the other guy win? Martinez had offered to strip the paint completely, make her look factory fresh. But that didn't sit right with me. Just seal it, I'd told him. Clear coat over everything. He'd given me that look mechanics reserve for customers who want something crazy, then shrugged and quoted me a price. I started with the mirrors first. The empty brackets where Kyle's kid had torn them off looked like empty eye sockets. The replacement pairs I'd ordered sat heavy in my palms, chrome catching morning light. My brother had insisted on upgrading to these exact models years ago. Can't move forward if you can't see where you've been, he'd said, grinning at his own wisdom. The smell of WD-40 and metal polish filled the air as I worked, bringing back memories of summer evenings spent in this same space. The radio hummed old country songs, the kind my brother used to torture me with, all twang and heartbreak. I'd kept complaining about his music taste right up until the day we lost him. Funny how those arguments feel precious now. Mrs. Peterson walked by around noon, slowing just enough to peer through the open garage door. I caught her eye and nodded. She hesitated, then lifted her hand in a small wave before hurrying on. That's how it had been since Kyle's arrest. Half the town trying to decide if they should acknowledge me or pretend I was invisible. The tires came next. 4 new Goodyears to replace the slashed ones. Each lug nut I tightened felt like securing another piece of myself back in place. The rubber smell brought back desert roads, convoy runs, the constant vigilance of watching for IEDs. Some skills you never lose, like knowing the difference between what needs fixing and what needs remembering. Looking good, a voice called out. I glanced up to find Bill Chen from the hardware store standing in the driveway. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable but determined. Listen, Jake, about those parts Kyle sold me. I didn't know. It's handled. I cut him off, not unkindly. Wasn't his fault Kyle had played him too. By late afternoon, I had the grill reassembled. The chrome teeth smiled back at me, proud despite everything. Through the open doors, I could hear kids playing somewhere down the street, their shouts carrying on the autumn air. It reminded me of Tommy Brewster, and for a moment I wondered if preserving his handiwork was the right call. But this wasn't about Tommy, or Kyle, or even the truck anymore. This was about owning your scars, wearing them like medals instead of hiding them like shame. The loser tag would stay, sealed under layers of clear coat, preserved like an insect in amber. Let people see it. Let them wonder. Let them understand that sometimes the best revenge is refusing to be erased. I ran my hand along the door panel, feeling every letter through my fingertips. The paint had dripped in places, making the orange lines look like they were melting. My brother would have laughed at the whole thing. He always did have a weird sense of humor. Only you, he'd have said, would turn graffiti into a statement piece. The sun was setting when I finally stepped back to survey my work. Most of the mechanical wounds had been healed, new mirrors gleaming, fresh rubber gripping the earth, grill proud and straight. But there it was, right across both doors, that spray-painted accusation, now protected under a glossy shell. Not erased, not hidden, just transformed. A few more neighbors passed by as I cleaned up my tools. Some nodded, others stared at the preserved graffiti with obvious confusion. Let them look. Let them see that you can't break a man by writing lies across his pride. Sometimes the best way to answer cruelty is to wear it like armor. I closed up the garage as darkness fell, my hands smelling of grease and victory. Tomorrow I'd tackle the interior, but tonight I'd let the clear coat cure, letting those orange letters set permanent against the metal. Sometimes the best revenge isn't erasing the insult. Sometimes it's turning it into your battle flag. That Friday afternoon felt different, cleaner somehow, like the air after a storm. I eased the F-250 into reverse, watching through the new mirrors as the truck found its old spot by the porch. Funny how something as simple as parking can feel like planting a flag. You know that feeling when you're putting the last piece into a 1,000-piece puzzle? That's what it was like, watching those wheels settle into the gravel grooves they'd worn over years. The cicadas were starting up their evening song, same as always. But this time their drone felt more like applause than background noise. The loser tag caught the sunlight, those orange letters trapped forever under the clear coat like some kind of twisted museum piece. Each drip and wobble in the spray paint told its own story now. Not about destruction anymore, but about survival. Hell, maybe even victory. Remember those old war movies where they'd paint kill counts on fighter planes? This was my kill count in a way. I grabbed a rag from my back pocket and gave the chrome one last buff, more out of habit than need. Mrs. Chen from the hardware store slowed her minivan as she passed, and this time she didn't just nod. She smiled and waved. Word gets around fast in small towns, and by now everyone knew both sides of the story. Funny how truth has a way of finding daylight. That weekend's swap meet had been circled on my calendar for months. Used to be one of my favorite events before everything. The morning air still had that late summer crispness when I fired up the engine. The rumble through the new exhaust system sang sweet and low. Another piece of myself, restored. You ever play chess? Because parking that truck dead center of the swap meet felt exactly like moving your queen into position. The morning sun hit the clear coat just right, making those orange letters shine like neon. Some folks stopped dead in their tracks when they saw it. Others did double takes, probably wondering if their eyes were playing tricks. It didn't take long for the first curious visitor to wander over. Jim Patterson, who runs the feed store, circled the truck like he was inspecting a show horse. "That's some statement, Jake," he said, running a weathered hand along the door panel. "Ballsy move, keeping it visible like that. Figure there's no shame in showing your scars," I told him. "Long as you earned them honest." More men drifted over as the morning wore on. Most of them I knew, some I'd done work for, others I'd seen around town all my life. They asked about the clear coat technique, about the new parts, about the decision to preserve rather than cover up. Each question felt like another brick being laid in the foundation of my reputation's rebuild. "Takes guts," Bobby Wheeler said, nodding at the graffiti. Most folks would have rushed to paint over it. I was explaining the mirror replacement to a couple of gearheads when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Kyle, looking like a deflated version of himself, skulked along the edge of the crowd. His shoulders hunched forward, hands shoved deep in his pockets, the posture of a man trying to disappear into himself. The conversation around me didn't stop, but I felt the energy shift as people noticed him. Kyle's eyes locked onto the truck, onto that preserved tag his son had sprayed. His face did this complicated dance between anger and something else. Maybe shame, maybe regret. Hard to tell with Kyle these days. For a moment our eyes met across the hood, He opened his mouth like he might say something, but nothing came out. The crowd kept moving, talking, pointing at various features of the restoration. Kyle stood frozen, watching his handiwork become my victory banner. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, each step heavy with the weight of everything he'd lost. "That the fella who—" Bobby left the question hanging. I just nodded, keeping my focus on explaining the grill assembly to someone else. No need to give Kyle's exit any more attention than it deserved. The truck spoke loud enough for both of us. The swap meet crowd had long since scattered, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a mason jar of sweet tea. Night was creeping in, painting everything in shades of blue-black while cicadas worked themselves into a frenzy. Kind of sound that reaches right down into your bones, familiar as your own heartbeat if you grew up around here. I settled deeper into the old wooden rocker, letting my eyes trace over the truck's silhouette. The security light caught those orange letters just right, making them glow like hot metal. Funny how something meant to wound you can end up being the thing that proves you're stronger than the hit. The ice clinked against glass as I took another sip, and for a second I was transported back to summer spent on this same porch with my brother. We'd sit out here after working on that truck all day, covered in grease and satisfaction, planning modifications we'd probably never get around to making. Some memories sting less with time. They just sort of settle into your chest like old friends. My phone buzzed against the arm of the rocker. Sergeant Doyle's name lit up the screen, along with a message that made my throat tight. "Saw the footage. Proud of you." Those 4 words hit harder than I expected. Doyle wasn't the type to throw around praise. Never had been, not even in the sandbox. When he said something, he meant it. And somehow, knowing he'd seen how it all played out, how I'd handled it, well, that validation meant more than any revenge could have. I typed back a quick, "Thanks, Sarge," before setting the phone aside. The night air had that particular sweetness that only shows up in late summer, when the heat starts losing its edge but hasn't given up completely. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked at nothing in particular. A car passed, headlights sweeping across the yard like searchlights. The whole scene felt different now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been since before my deployment. Not because everything was fixed. The porch still needed work. The grass was only half tamed. That orange graffiti would always be there, sealed under clear coat like an insect in amber. But maybe that was the point. I took another long look at the truck. The word "loser" seemed to pulse in the security light, but it didn't have any power anymore. Just letters now, no different than the serial numbers stamped on engine parts. A mark of authentication, if anything. Proof that something tried to break me and failed. The ice in my tea had mostly melted, watering down what was left. I didn't mind. Sometimes things get diluted but still keep their essential nature. Like how Kyle's betrayal had started out burning hot but cooled into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Understanding that weak men will always try to tear down what they can't build themselves. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a picture from Bobby Wheeler, the truck at the swap meet surrounded by admirers. The caption read, "True colors always show through." I had to smile at that. Small towns might trade in gossip, but they also know how to recognize truth when they see it. The cicadas seemed to dial it up a notch, their chorus swelling like they were trying to drown out every other sound in creation. I closed my eyes and just listened, letting the familiar rhythm wash over me. This was what peace felt like. Not the absence of conflict, but the quiet certainty that you'd faced it honestly and come out the other side intact. The security light caught a moth, its wings casting strange shadows as it danced around the bulb. Nature's little reminder that some creatures will always be drawn to light, even if it burns them. Kyle had been like that moth, I suppose, attracted to the bright shine of other people's possessions, other people's lives. But unlike the moth, he'd tried to dim the light instead of accepting his place in relation to it. I drained the last of my tea, mostly water now, and set the jar aside. The night had deepened to the point where the truck was more shadow than substance, but I could still make out those letters. They'd probably be visible for years to come, telling their story to anyone who cared to ask. Not a story of defeat. No, something altogether different. Something about standing your ground. About choosing restoration over revenge. About letting your scars speak for themselves. Monday morning hit town like a thunderclap. You know how news travels in small places, not in straight lines but in circles that keep getting wider until they catch everyone in the ripples. Kyle's downfall was like that. I was drinking coffee at Mabel's diner when the first wave hit. The local paper's website had posted coverage of the school board hearing, complete with screenshots from my ShedCam footage. There was Kyle's boy, clear as day, varsity jacket gleaming under the security light, spray can raised like some twisted salute. The timestamp burned in the corner left no room for doubt. "Ain't that something?" Mabel said, topping off my cup. Her voice had that particular tone small-town folks use when they're trying not to sound too pleased about someone else's misfortune. After all that talk about his boy being college material, I just nodded, watching other customers lean over their phones, sharing the news in hushed voices. By noon, the story had grown teeth. The police report about Kyle's stolen parts racket hit the wire, and suddenly everyone had a story to tell. Former customers started coming forward, filing complaints about parts that didn't match their paperwork. Each revelation was another nail in Kyle's coffin. You ever watch dominoes fall? It's mesmerizing. One tips, then another, until what looked like random pieces turns into an inevitable pattern. Kyle's life followed that same rhythm that day. By mid-afternoon, his former employer had released a statement, distancing themselves from any unauthorized activities. Translation: Kyle was officially unemployable in 3 counties. I wasn't there when his wife left, didn't need to be. Mrs. Peterson from the post office saw the whole thing, watched her load up her car while Kyle stood in the driveway, hands opening and closing like he was trying to grab onto something that wasn't there anymore. Some might call that cruel. I called it karma. The Veterans Group ceremony that evening felt almost like an afterthought. They gave me some plaque about community integrity, nice enough with my name engraved in brass that would probably tarnish in a year. But standing there under those fluorescent lights, shaking hands with people who suddenly remembered they'd always trusted me, I couldn't help thinking about how recognition often comes too late to matter. After the ceremony, I drove home slow, letting the truck's engine talk to me through the floorboards. That deep rumble had always been better company than most people I knew. The security light clicked on as I pulled in, washing everything in that harsh, honest glare. I killed the engine but didn't get out right away. Just sat there, looking at my reflection in the windshield, distorted but still recognizable. Funny how you can lose sight of yourself for a while, but the important parts stay intact if you let them. Finally, I stepped out into the cooling night air. My boots crunched on gravel as I walked around to the passenger side where that orange graffiti still blazed, now trapped under layers of clear coat like some kind of twisted museum piece. I ran my fingers across it, smooth as glass now, no texture left to catch on. The letters that were meant to wound had become something else entirely, a testament. You know what the real difference is between winners and losers? It's not about who hits first or even who hits hardest. It's about who stays standing when the dust settles. Kyle never understood that. He thought winning meant taking what belonged to others, breaking what he couldn't possess. But all he'd really done was show everyone exactly who he was. Standing there in my driveway, hand still resting on those sealed letters, I felt something settle inside me. Not satisfaction exactly, but certainty. The kind of certainty you get when you've faced something ugly and come through it clean. Because here's the truth about betrayal. You don't lose when you're betrayed. You lose when you back down. I smiled then. A real smile that started somewhere deep and worked its way up slowly. It wasn't about Kyle anymore or his boy or even the truck. It was about standing your ground when the world tries to push you off it. About keeping your word even when others break theirs. About rebuilding what others try to tear down. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.